been about a year since the release of The Last of Us Part 2. At the end of my first playthrough of the game, which you should go check out, I gave some brief thoughts on the game and said I would make a better review later. Well, here we are a year later and I still haven't done said review. But now, the time, at last, has finally come. Just a quick warning, this video will contain spoilers for the game, so steer clear if you haven't already played it. And one more thing before I start, I just want to emphasize real quick that this video is about how I personally feel about the game. You're allowed to feel however you want about it. My goal here isn't to persuade you to love it or like it or dislike it or hate it. It's just to express how I feel about it. I'm in no way trying to win you over to my side or convince you that I'm right and you're wrong. I just want to talk about the game, let my feelings on it be known, and all that fun stuff. We're good, just as long as you don't act like a clown and attack people for not sharing the same opinion as you. That's dumb nonsense for children. Don't do it.
More blood. Dina, this way.
To start, I just want to talk about how I felt about the game initially. I liked it a lot. I didn't think it was quite as good as the first game, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. I specifically remember thinking that the story, while great, didn't live up to the love that I had of the first game. I remember talking about how I didn't enjoy things such as the musical score as much as the first game either, and how I felt the game had went on a little longer than it needed to, and that the ending kind of dragged on more than I wished it had. But after the initial playthrough, I went and read and watched many reviews, browsed various threads of people discussing the game, and I've watched a few playthroughs from people that I typically enjoy watching that style of content from. And after having done all that, and after having played the game myself a few times, I felt that I had a pretty good idea of where I stood with the game. But before I made this video, I wanted to make sure, so I replayed not just Part 2, but also the 2014 remaster of Part 1. So let me start by talking about Part 1 for just a little bit. I have to say that Part 1 still holds up pretty well. It's certainly aged, but I think it still looks good visually and the story is still superb. There are a lot of great small moments in the game that really make it something special. But I want to highlight one that is probably fairly well known, and another that I haven't really seen much conversation about. The first is how Joel, in moments of panic and worry, refers both to Sarah and Ellie as baby and or baby girl.
Oh no. Sarah. Move your hands, baby. I know, baby, I know. Listen to me, I know this hurts, baby. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. All right, I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby, I know it hurts. Come on, baby, please. I know, baby, I know. Sarah. Baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Come on. No. No. No, 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 no. Ellie! Stop! Stop!
Fucking touch me!
It's okay. It's me. It's me. It's me. Look. It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
No.
It's okay. Come on, baby girl. I got you. Oh, shit.
It's just a small, subtle way of showing how much Joel grows to love Ellie, possibly even as much as his quote-unquote real daughter. And the other thing I picked up on, which I've never noticed before, is how the scene is framed when Sarah is dying, and how the scene is framed as Joel is trying to help Ellie after she nearly drowns towards the end of the game. Both scenes are shot from the side of the characters, with Joel hovering over the girls, trying anything he can do to stop them from dying.
You'll be okay, baby. Stay with me. I'll pick you up. I know, baby. I know it hurts. Come on, baby. Please. I know, baby. I know. Sarah. Come on. Baby. Hands in the air. She's not
Obviously, it's not identical, but I have a feeling it was intentional. I just love the small little details like that. As I mentioned, I still think this game looks really good. There were a couple of moments that looked a little strange, but for the most part it's pretty solid, and dare I say it even looks just as good or even maybe better than some modern games, crazily. Oh, and that sweet 60 FPS, man, I loved that, but it did take some getting used to just because I wasn't expecting it. There would be times where I'd pick up the game again to continue my journey, and it would take me a minute or two to adjust. Honestly, the only things that I don't think have aged particularly well is how lackluster the combat feels, especially in comparison to Part 2, and how wonky the AI can be. Whether it be enemies not seeing me when I'm clearly visible, or allies also clearly being out in the open, and the enemies not responding at all, it's just a big problem, and that's a fairly universal issue in games, and I imagine it'd be really difficult to perfect. It's just distracting. It's improved a little bit in the second game, but we'll get to that a little later. Overall, I still think it's an incredible game, and I hadn't played it myself in many years, so it was great to re-experience it and fall in love with it all over again. And now, for the elephant in the room, let's talk about how I currently feel about The Last of Us Part 2. I want to start with talking about some welcome additions and improvements to the gameplay itself. These won't be in any specific order, just the order of which I wrote them down during my replay. I love the addition of the journal. It's a great way of adding further context to how Ellie's feeling about the various events in the game. There are only so many ways you can have a character express how they feel in a natural and organic way, and a great solution to that is the journal. It isn't necessary or shoved down our throats. We can ignore it if we wanted to, or we could study every word. It's up to us to decide how much info we want, and I think that's just a great way of delivering information. It also reminded me of Life is Strange, so it has that going for it. The AI in this game is so much better than Part 1, naturally. They just seem so much smarter and a lot more balanced. In Part 1, I encountered some enemies that were just awful. They couldn't hit me whatsoever. It was just really weird. But then I encountered some that apparently had an aimbot, and that was quite frustrating. I feel like Part 2 is just more consistent and generally more realistic. It's an overall improvement, and I feel that is very important for this game. I'm glad it's there. It's a small thing, but the addition of adding a button to swap to your next weapon was very helpful. I no longer need to stop, open up the selection menu, and choose a box, but all I have to do is simply tap on a button and it changes instantly in the heat of battle and makes combat flow just so much better. Which brings me to my next point. Combat is really good in this game. While it was enjoyable in the first, I genuinely had a great time playing this game. Something as simple as adding the ability to go prone and to hide in the grass and move through it makes for so much more dynamic situations. And not only that, but actually being able to dodge attacks feels so great. During my playthrough of Part 1, I couldn't figure out how to dodge or if there was even a dodge mechanic. I came to the conclusion that there wasn't because I had tried seemingly everything to get it to work, and I couldn't find anything online. The way that combat, specifically melee combat and dodges feel in Part 2, the flow is so satisfying. It's really impressive. Playing into combat, there's one really cool detail about this game I find really neat. During the second flashback sequence with Joel and Ellie, there's a moment where they encounter a lot of infected. There are two ways you can approach this situation. You can, of course, take them out silently, or you can take them out with a bang. The awesome detail is that depending on how you play, the game will actually give you different results. If you attack with guns ablazing, there is another wave or two that will attack you after the first wave is wiped out. However, if you do it all ninja-like, those additional waves never come. The infected don't hear the gunshots, and they don't come to kill you. It's just one of those details that you can't notice in one playthrough, only through playing through it yourself or watching other people play it. It's really cool, and I just love that attention to detail. There is an aspect of the gameplay that I think could be improved for any further sequels or anything they do, and that is how finding useful documents works. For example, in Seattle Day 1, you have to use a page you find that has a bunch of codes for the gates around the city, and you have to use that document fairly often. It just sucks having to scroll all the way through your inventory to try to find that one page just to get a code to enter it into a gate. I wish there was just some way of pinning that to the top, or it popping up at the top automatically, because they know you're going to need to use it. Unfortunately, there wasn't, and you had to scroll all the way through that list to find it, and it's just tedious, and it was a little more difficult than it should have been. And one of the things I'm more mixed on with the game is the gun upgrade animations. On one hand, they're really cool. I love them. But sometimes they can take a tad too long. They slow down the game a little bit, especially when you're trying to upgrade multiple things at once. It's not a big deal, but sometimes you just want to get moving, and you end up having to wait for the full animation to play out. It just slows down the game in a way that isn't satisfying. I have one last technical aspect of the game I want to touch on before diving into the meat and potatoes of the game, and that is the transition from gameplay to cutscene and vice versa. It's handled so dang well, and for some reason it just blows my mind every time. This isn't the first game to do this, obviously. Even the first one does it, I believe, but there's just something about it in this game specifically that makes it really stand out. It's done extremely well. Now I want to dive into the, for lack of a better term, filmmaking aspects of this game, like the music, the character story, that sort of thing. I'll start with the music. I said in my initial thoughts after playing the game that I didn't feel that the music hit as hard in Part 2 as it did in Part 1. I also mentioned that perhaps that's because this was my first experience with it, whereas I had listened to Part 1's musical score many times. I'm happy to say that I love the music in this game just as much, if not more, than the music for Part 1. Gustavo Santaolalla, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, once again brings a unique sound to the game. He doesn't just copy his work from Part 1. It's still recognizable as The Last of Us, but it can also be easily differentiated.
Don't ever let me see you again. Come on.
The score in Part 1 has some stuff that feels heavy, but underneath the heaviness there's this sort of innocence that sometimes shines through and creates some really special moments. Part 2 tonally feels like a much different game than Part 1, so it makes sense to change it up. I feel that this game has haunting and even heavier music that at times has beautiful moments of despair. It does a great job of just dragging you down while also giving you something pleasant to listen to. There are exceptions to that, of course, like during the museum flashback.
I do okay.
Are you fucking kidding me?
You're welcome, kiddo. What do you say we keep looking around, huh?
Yeah, I guess.
Of course, Part 2 also brought in a new composer to the franchise, Matt Quayle. I believe he did most of the music that actually plays in encounters in-game itself, and he did a great job. I think this game does a great job at establishing its tone and feel, and I think much of that is due to Mac's work. There's some genuinely scary sections of gameplay in Part 2, and I feel like much of that has to do with how creepy and eerie the music is. The same goes for heavy action sequences. The music really put me on edge and just kept me there. It's so well done. I think both composers brought their A-game and did an amazing job, not just creating memorable music, but music that really enhances scenes and moments that they are paired with. I don't think it needs to be said that all the performances in this game are incredible. Ashley Johnson, Laura Bailey, Jeffrey Pierce, Shannon Woodard, and of course, Troy Baker and literally everybody else in this game does an amazing job with their respective characters. Love or hate the characters, there's no denying that the people behind them are extremely talented performers. Without folks like that, these games just wouldn't be nearly as good. And here we go. Story and character time. As I said earlier, after my first playthrough, I said I liked the game, but having a year to sit on it and really think about it, I think that has changed. These days, I personally feel that the game's narrative isn't very good, because I think it's great. I've come to really love the story this game tells, and I think it's a perfect follow-up to the original game. I know many people dislike the game, and they'll claim things like that Joel is acting out of character, but I just don't see it. To me, the Joel we see in The Last of Us 2 is the exact same Joel we see in The Last of Us 1. But it's been 5 years, he's aged, he's changed. He's settled into his new home where he doesn't have to be constantly thinking about surviving. He's hanging out, drinking coffee, and playing his guitar. I feel like I perfectly understand every action he takes in the game, and I never really understood the hate for Joel's role in this game. For me, it just worked. Obviously, the other big point of contention in this game is Abby. I, like most people, was totally down for killing her at the start of the game. If you had told me in the moment of Joel's death that at the end of the game I would be genuinely upset if his murderer was killed, I'd think you were lying, but it's true. When the final fight came around, I really didn't want Ellie to kill her. It was very bold of them to try and make you like the character that brutally murdered the previous antagonist. And I know it didn't work for everyone. I know that Abby's story didn't interest some people, but I loved it. Another criticism I see fairly often is that the game is quote-unquote about revenge, and that no revenge is had at the end. But I feel like if that's what you think the game is about, perhaps you misunderstand it. I don't think I can tell you what this game is about in one word, because it's more complicated than that. Personally, I believe that this game is ultimately about obsession. Both Ellie and Abby's stories deal with it. Ellie becomes obsessed with the idea of killing Abby, to the point where she nearly loses everything because of it. She loses Dina, she loses JJ, she loses the ability to properly play her guitar. One of her last connections to Joel, and nearly loses her humanity. The thing that she is so scared of in the first game actually happens.
How is it that you're never scared?
Who says that I'm not?
What are you scared of?
Let's see. Scorpions are pretty creepy. Being by myself. I'm scared of ending up alone.
While we are experiencing that obsession in real time with Ellie, Abby is trying to figure out what to do after she succumbs to hers. She spent so much of her time working to kill Joel that she pushed away the person she loved. While Ellie stops from going too far, Abby goes through with it. She begins to feel guilty, perhaps not for what she did to Joel, but for the effects that her obsession had on others. She starts to realize how stupid and blind she was for the decisions she's made, and decides to try to do better.
She's gone. Oh my god, she's gone.
on. Those were your fucking people. You're my people.
Of course, all of that is just my interpretation in a very condensed format.
Okay, what do you want to do?
I could probably talk about Ellie and Abby's stories for hours, because I love each of them. There are even a lot of smaller connections and parallels between those characters, like both of them having the person they love tell them that they're having a kid.
Mel's pregnant.
Really? I think I'm pregnant.
What? Don't worry, it's not yours.
Slightly different circumstances there, obviously, but they react similarly.
Oh. Okay.
It's not just that, though.
Should I say congrats? You got Mel pregnant. It's not yours.
What are we supposed to do now?
Nothing. I just need to rest for a second.
Are you fucking kidding me? How long have you known?
I was late a few weeks ago.
A few weeks? We could have still turned back.
I didn't know. I wasn't sure, okay? I didn't want to be a burden.
Well, you're a burden now, aren't you?
Pregnant? Fucking pregnant. How could you keep something like that?
I think both of their individual stories are great, and I think they come together to make a whole story that I find extremely emotional and brilliantly written. Of course, Abby is just one of the many new characters introduced into this game, and I can't honestly say that I disliked any of them. Dina, Jesse, Owen, Mel, Lev, and Yara. I think each of them are fairly interesting and bring a lot to the table, and I would have loved to get to know them even more, honestly. I also really like getting to know some of the characters that don't even appear in the game, like Eugene, and we learn quite a bit about him. And he has a pretty strong presence despite the fact that we never actually see him in the game.
Huh.
Definitely Eugene's place. He was a Firefly?
He served with Tommy.
Okay.
I can honestly say that I think Part 2 is not only as good as Part 1, but better in almost every way. While I think both have incredible stories, I think the choices they made in Part 2 were extremely risky, and I respect the fact that they went through with them. And thankfully, I also love them. I think even in terms of gameplay, this game takes the cake. I've already talked about the combat, but I think stuff like the level design is better too. I love all the different variety in levels. Stuff like the open world area in Ellie's Day 1, the terrifying tower in Abby's Day 2, Abby's Day 3 and the craziness that is the island, specifically escaping it.
Which way to the docks? Up and over the hill.
So many awesome levels that feel unique and fresh. Somehow this game manages to not only be more cinematic than the original, but also even more of a game. I kind of view Part 1 as an enjoyable game with an amazing story, whereas I view Part 2 as an extremely fun game with an even more amazing story. It just hits on all levels for me. It's easily in my top 10 favorite games of all time, and as far as story-based games go, it's probably in my top 3. I've come to love this game so much, and many of the criticisms I have had have either just disappeared as I've become more familiar with the game, or are just so minor that they don't really bother me. It's obviously not a perfect game, it has its problems, but for me, it's about as close as you can get. It has a really special place in my heart, and I don't think that will be changing anytime soon. Anyways, there you have it, my thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2. I'm obviously not a professional critic, and I'm not the most analytical person in the world, but I figured I'd just weigh into the discussions happening online.
Get 'em.
While I'm here talking about The Last of Us, I'd also like to take a second to discuss the other current projects in the world of The Last of Us that are currently in development. Recently, there are rumors that a remake of The Last of Us Part 1 is on the way, and I have to say, it feels really unnecessary. Like I said, I think Part 1 still holds up fairly well, and the game isn't even 10 years old yet. It feels too soon to do a remake, but with that being said, I'll probably buy it. I'm pretty interested in seeing how it turns out. What will they be changing? Will they change any story stuff? Will they stuff like combat get an overhaul to be more like Part 2? And if they choose to change the combat, will there be stuff like going prone and hiding in grass? And will they have to add grass to different levels? Will they be changing the levels around? I have so many questions about what a potential remake could be. But, you know, at the end of the day, I suppose that they know what they're doing because they know suckers like me will probably buy it anyways, so more power to them, I suppose. We know that an outline for The Last of Us Part 3 has been written. Whether or not we actually ever see it is a different question though, as it doesn't seem to currently be in active development. And they seem to be working on some other things. I'm totally on board for Part 3, but I'm fine taking some time to get there. I don't know what the story is or who's in it, but I'm excited to check it out when the time is right. Selfishly, I want both Abby and Ellie to be in it, but I'd especially love if they just hugged it out and became best friends, although I feel like that's very unlikely. There are a lot of different directions they could go with the Part 3, and I trust the writers to deliver another great story in the world of The Last of Us whenever they feel is appropriate. We also know that they seem to be working on a multiplayer mode for The Last of Us Part 2, or possibly even a standalone multiplayer game. Whether that remains in The Last of Us universe or not will have to be seen. Perhaps they found a formula they really liked and just decided to make a new game out of it entirely. Who knows? I haven't played a ton of factions in The Last of Us Part 1, but I know people seem to love it, and I look forward to playing whatever this game turns out to be. I hope we get some details soon, but that's all I can do currently is hope. And of course, we also know quite a bit about the upcoming HBO show adaptation as well, and I'm totally on board for that. I like everybody involved, including the directors and actors. I'm mostly excited to see how similar it is and how different it is to the game. With the casting of Pedro as Joel, I initially imagined that they were trying to differentiate themselves from the game, starting with that casting, but they just recently revealed that the actress from Marlene from the game is reprising her role in the show, so perhaps I was wrong. Regardless, this is easily one of my most anticipated shows, as I talked about in my Let's Play. I also wonder how they'll handle adapting the story of Part 2 into the show, or if they will even do it at all, but I've already talked about that, so I won't get into it again. Anyways, I think that about wraps up everything for this video. I'd love to hear not just your thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2, but also about all the other projects I mentioned, and also on this video. Did you like it? Did you not? Let me know. Just go easy on me. I don't want to be given the verbal equivalent of this.